begin this video, I want to ask you to think about something that you're pretty good at. This could be a technical skill, this could be a subject matter, a sport, a hobby, maybe even something you do every day like driving. Now just think about that. And think back to when you first started this activity or the first time you ever did it. And pick a number to rate yourself, kind of like 1 to 10, right? 10 being just amazing, incredible, you knew how to do it, super smooth, perfect, whatever. And 1, right, being like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Okay, so once you have that number, now take that same thing and maybe rate yourself from 1 to 10 now. Okay. So I imagine you probably went, maybe for me, maybe I'll pick baseball, say. First time I picked up a bat, I didn't even know which way to, to swing it, which way to do it, how to throw it. And now, I mean, I was never that great, but I'm pretty good. So maybe you started off at like a 3 or a 4, and now after these years, you're at a 8 or 7, maybe a 9 or 10. So this is actually a really, really important thing to think through and try to understand, well, how did you go from like a 1 or a 2 or a 3 to a 7 or 8 or a 9 or a 10? What'd you do? Well, I imagine you started and you probably had someone teaching you some of the principles. Maybe you had a teacher, maybe you had a coach, a mentor, maybe you watched videos, maybe you read a how-to book, a textbook. Something that got you some of the knowledge, right? You kind of studied the best practices, the principles of it. How do you actually do it? But that wasn't enough, was it? You had to do the work. You had to do the practice. You had to get your reps in, right? Playing baseball was one thing. Have a coach show me like, this is how you swing, but then I actually had to do it. So what we see is this process of learning that I really want to dig into, because anything in this life that we can be better at, we do so by studying and practicing. Everything you have in your life right now, all these behaviors, these habits, these things that you do that you're good at, came about through this learning process of study and practice. And so the question becomes, how could happiness be any different? And I hope that's somewhat of a powerful shift, right? How could our well-being, our quality of life be any different? Because we tend to have we don't think of happiness or well-being in this way as a subject to study or as a discipline to practice, but it's that same pattern, right? If you understand the principles and you study those, but then you actually do the work and do the practice, of course, you learn to be happier, to have a better quality of life. So how could happiness be any different, right? That's like the big idea of this video when we're talking about the nature of happiness and changing our point of view. And there's a quote that I absolutely love that sums this up. There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. That's from teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. And it's the idea of this, happiness, it's a way of being. It is this practice. It is in the same way a learned skill set, a learned subject matter. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in this video. So we have this idea that happiness is kind of a practice, right? When the conditions are right, happiness arises, right? So let's look at kind of like the universal patterns here, right? Everything depends upon the laws of cause and effect, right? Causation. If you look at what the natural sciences are, physics, biology, chemistry, even mathematics in some extent, right? Like all of those things are just studying causation, right? Cause and effect. When these conditions are right in the equation, right, this will happen. Right? Or physics, right? What's causing this to happen in the universe, or chemistry? When these things go together, that causes this reaction. Right? All of these different things are understanding cause and effect. What are the causes and conditions for things to happen? And so again, this same pattern extends to happiness, right? Happiness depends upon certain causes and conditions. And if you have those causes and conditions, happiness arises, right? What makes an acorn into an oak tree, right? Well, the potential is always there, but when the sunlight, you have the water, you have the soil, you have time, the tree, the oak tree, manifests. So we need to extend this thinking to happiness, right? And so all of a sudden this ties back to the exercise I had you do at the start of this video where you thought about, how'd you go from whatever, a 1 to a 10? Study and practice, okay? So if you can identify the causes and conditions and then do the work to create them and actually do the practices or do the activities, the behaviors, the habits, then you have happiness, right? And so I hope that this is a fundamental shift in our view, right? Seeing it as a subject matter to study and practice, right? There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. And there are two more important notes on that. So what I hope we've done to summarize so far is shift our thinking of happiness as something we, when I drink a beer, when I eat dinner, when I get make money, when I achieve something, when I get promoted, whatever, then I get happiness. I'm not throwing all those things away. Those can be a part of it. But it's really about understanding that we can systematically study and identify the causes and conditions for happiness, and then take effort, build habits to create those causes and conditions within ourselves and within our lives. And when we do that, happiness arises. Right? Again, it's a way of being. So those two notes I mentioned. The first is that when happiness comes, it's right here. It's not going to be out in the future. There's really 2 days that we cannot experience happiness, and that's yesterday and tomorrow. Really think about that, right? So that's not saying we shouldn't plan for the future and we can't enjoy beautiful memories, but in terms of actually experiencing joy, satisfaction, peace, excitement, it's got to be right here. Okay, again, it can be directed towards the past or future, but it has to be right here. So we have to avoid this trap of making happiness contingent, right? Once I get the thing, then I can be happy. Or once I get there and I can just relax and kick my feet up, then I'll be happy. Then that is a problem. As one of my teachers, Suzuki Roshi, said, your life is not preparation for something else. You have to understand that happiness does occur in the here and the now. Right? So again, we can, of course, we want to be wise and prepare for the future, think logically, right? Not just be like, oh, well, happiness is right now. I'm going to smoke as many cigarettes as I can, go to the buffet, right? Whatever. Like, there's a balance there, but it's easy, at least in my experience, to fall into this trap sometimes of kind of pushing it off. I call it happiness procrastination. So again, bringing it back to understanding, like, okay, happiness depends upon causes and conditions in the present moment. And when those are there, I'm experiencing it right now. The second part, I think, is a matter of focus. And I read this article where the author talked about the concept of obliquity, basically meaning that we need to distinguish between focusing on inputs and outputs. And again, there's a common mistake with happiness. I think we tend to focus on outputs and not so much inputs, right? So this video is not about saying, oh, you need to focus on happiness and just be like, I'm happy, I need to be happier. No. Focus again on those causes and conditions, right? So instead of focusing on just the fruits or the results or the outcomes of I want to experience feeling better or higher quality of life, whatever, focusing on the inputs that lead to those outputs. And I use the gardening analogy, going back to the same theme, right, of viewing happiness as a way of being, as a practice. So you want to have a garden, right? So imagine you just sit there and you just focus on fruits and vegetables, right, or the harvest, right? Like, oh, all I'm thinking about is the fruits and vegetables. That's what I want. I want to get the rewards here. I want to feel good. I want to eat those. That's not actually going to do anything. Right? What you need to be thinking about is, I'm going to water it, I'm going to weed, I'm going to till the soil, I'm going to fertilize, I'm going to do all of the kind of processes of gardening so that the results, the outputs, the fruits and vegetables arise on their own. Okay? So what we're doing here is, you're going to learn from me is how to garden. But it's just a slightly nuanced thing in shifting our focus, right? So it's not just about focusing on happiness, so to speak, but really understanding what are the causes and conditions, what are the processes, the steps, the habits that lead to that output, and focusing our attention there. So that's really it, right? This new perspective. What are the causes and conditions of happiness? Right? How can we nourish them? That's what the study of happiness is all about, but it all starts with this new perspective that happiness is a way of being.